Hi, this is Greg Kesich. I'm the editorial page editor at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with a full complement of Sunday columnists. Almost full. We don't have Jim Fossil here, unfortunately, but I have Bill Nemitz and Alan Caron. Welcome back, Alan, and Cynthia Dill.
Hello.
And boy, the big news day today. The House passed the American Health Care Act with 217 votes, one more than the absolute minimum it needed to pass, and that number includes Representative Bruce Poliquin of Maine's 2nd District. Poliquin put this bill over the top, even though it seems to be designed to hurt Maine's 2nd District. It's particularly hard on elderly people and people who have low incomes. Poliquin has been very shy about saying how he stood on this bill, and today he issued a long statement claiming that it only affected 7% of people in the state, which, doing the math, is about 91,000 people, and that's not true unless you don't count people on Medicaid as people in the state. So it's going to have it would have a profound effect. It's unclear what its future is, but at least now we know where Bruce Poliquin stands. So what do we think?
At length, we know how he stands.
Yeah.
I mean, he went from saying nothing for so long to putting out, I think, what must be the longest statement of his congressional career. But you're right. I think he cherry picks ad nauseum here in terms of saying what's good about this bill, and apparently there's nothing bad about it. As I followed this week, right up until today, I am kind of myopically focused on people with pre-existing conditions because I'm one of them. Uh-huh. And I've been dealing with health issues for some time now, and I'm blessed to have employer-provided insurance on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think looking farther ahead down the road, and looking around at all the people I've met on my journey, some of them have employer-provided insurance, some of them don't. This is a real moment of crisis for a lot of people in terms of how am I going to continue to get my care, or am I going to continue to get my care? And as this thing heads for the Senate, I really think you're going to hear loud and clear from that segment of the population, which is bigger than you might think.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Poliquin's been saying is that the Affordable Care Act is collapsing of its own weight, and that we have to do this to prevent it from falling apart. Is that something that's going to resonate with people at all?
Well, if what he's referring to is the 11 million people who have health insurance, sure, it's a big deal, but it's going to be even a bigger deal when so many of those people are denied health insurance. I mean, there was a lot of talk around the kinks in the rollout of Obamacare and the failure of the various websites to, handle the signing up, and the whole process was tricky. But for the most part, Obamacare is a staple for so many families now and businesses. And this repeal bill, there's no way the legislators who voted on it today could have read it. And it hasn't been scored by the Congressional Budget Office, so any statistics around it are really spun from whole cloth as far as we can tell. And so for the Republicans now to say that they're somehow doing something different when, the criticism of Obamacare was that, some remark that we have to pass it before we know what's in it. Well, this thing is never going to pass. So, we have this bill that they know isn't going to pass, that they didn't read, that we don't know what it costs, and somehow this is the change that Republicans are bringing to Washington. I think it's going to really hurt Bruce Poliquin in 2018.
Does this make him vulnerable?
Well, of course, we'll see what happens. If the Senate just snuffs it out and people's health insurance continue along as it has, maybe not. But I don't know how he dodges the bullet if his constituents are going to be, harmed substantially because of his vote.
What do you think, Alan?
I think it harms them on the edges, and maybe more. As Cynthia said, it depends on what happens. To me, it's a kind of a papering over of the differences in the Republican side on this bill. I don't think this is going through the Senate. I'll be shocked if anything like this goes through the Senate. And, the House has voted on repeal multiple times, knowing that it would never get through the Senate. In a sense, I think they did the same thing here. Poliquin, I think, is beginning to be a caricature. We saw it in today's article, where you start to get headlines about him being indecisive. That, I think, is going to come back to haunt him in the next election cycle if he has a good opponent. The idea, and it's almost insulting to voters, that he hadn't decided what his position on this was until the moment the vote came. I find it absurd.
Right. If that were true, he's a very fast writer, because that's a very long statement he came up with.
Yeah, and guess what?
I wonder if he's available.
And what do the speakers say for weeks? We're going to bring this to the floor when we have the votes.
Right.
How would they know when they had the votes unless they had asked the members
Well,
of the caucus?
I don't think it's a matter of, he may look indecisive, when obviously it's more he's evasive, and he just doesn't want anything he does down there in any way to come back and bite him. But it's, in his case, it's bordering on, paranoia. The guy he seems so afraid to state an opinion about anything that we now literally have, as you said, Alan, we have a situation where reporters are chasing him around the Capitol, and he's mistakenly ducking into the ladies' room.
Which I think, given all the talk about the bathroom bill and people's gender in bathrooms, I just thought that was kind of a Freudian slip or whatever.
The only thing lacking was the woman's scream.
But I think this is not.
With his earbuds on.
I don't think this is indecisiveness. I think this is not being truthful.
Exactly.
And honest with the voters of Maine and the people of Maine. And if that's the reputation that he ends up getting, and you can look at this pattern over and over again, he's just not leveling with people.
It's just not credible.
And really, how dumb does he think we are?
I think the reason he waited as long as he did is very simple. If it did come to a vote, and so he had to vote, he had to take a position. Had it gone the way of the previous round, and let's say yesterday or the day before things started to collapse, in the world of Bruce Poliquin, the best possible position for him to take is no position, so that he can't have anything pinned on him in the 2018 cycle. So he waits until the last minute, and then he has no choice. But up to that point, you will never get a position or a statement or anything out of this guy. Is that a way to govern? Is that a way to lead?
I was surprised he didn't. I was surprised he didn't take the opportunity to latch on to the Vice President Pence's remarks about Maine's high-risk pool and how this new bill incorporates an idea for Maine around high-risk pools. That would have been a perfect entree for Poliquin to say, "Hey, look, see, I've worked on this." He could have taken credit for it, like, he did with everything that happened while he was treasurer, and he didn't. So
the shoes.
I don't know.
New Balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Contract,
But what's interesting to me about this whole healthcare vote is, I'm sure the Trump administration wants the bill to be done and over with so they can just check it off. They don't care about the policy. I just wondered, does anyone care about the policy anymore? It just seems it's all about the politics.
Yeah.
Which have just begun.
Should a Democrat announce today? Today, the day of the vote, should somebody come out and say, I'm going to run against Bruce Poliquin to try to...
Emily Kane already tried that.
Yeah.
I think it was, 2 weeks after the election?
Right. But
last time around, and it didn't work. I think...
people aren't ready.
I don't think people are ready.
Well, one thing I noticed that 14 of the 23 Democrats who... 14 of the 23 Republicans who were elected in districts that Hillary Clinton won voted for this bill today. And that would seem to put them all, put an X on their back. And even the people like Poliquin who ran in districts that Trump won, I don't remember people demanding that their health care be taken away. I didn't think that was what was getting people to vote for Trump. In fact, he was saying quite the opposite. So I think that's going to make everybody who voted for this bill vulnerable to some degree.
this all presumes, though, that this is going to result in actual law.
Right.
Correct.
And I think,
Yeah.
Alan, you hit it right on the head. I mean, how many times, the dynamics were different under the Obama administration, but how many dozen times did the House vote
Right.
to repeal? And I agree, there's just no way the Senate is going to go along with this. So now it's going to become, I guess Paul Ryan's off the hot seat and Mitch McConnell is on it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, they all go home. They all go home
They'll
this
go
week.
home real soon.
Yeah.
So there's a recess, and we'll see if it's going to be different than.
And,
the
and
43
it's,
other votes.
in a way, it's an extension of the White House governing by executive order.
Yeah.
Big photo ops, a headline that suggests some real changes happening. Then you burrow into the article and you find out, well, it's suggestive or it's directional. Congress is going to have to act. It's going to be real action. But the headline's there, and, and why are they doing it? Because they don't have anything else that they can do.
Right.
It's a real opportunity missed, though, for Bruce Poliquin, because healthcare is so important for the state of Maine because of our elderly population and poverty rates. And to the extent that the Senate, sure, it's not going to pass the bill, but it's going to do something to the extent that there was a conference committee that he could possibly get appointed to, since the bill incorporates some Maine ideas. If he had gotten engaged in the policy and kept the voters informed about where he was thinking and where he was going and what's at stake, it'd be so much different from him. But he, like we've said, he's so evasive
Right.
Yeah.
that he has no real significant role in any of this stuff.
Yeah. So, boy, I can't think of a smooth transition. But
What time
I would
is
like
it?
to change the topic, and
That's
we
pretty
promised
smooth.
at the end of last time that we would talk about the time change bill in front of the legislature that would prevent us from going to standard time if the states of New Hampshire and Massachusetts also decided to do the same, and possibly maybe if the voters were asked at referendum and agreed to do it. And this is a topic of great interest because we all have clocks, and people in Maine are always complaining about how early it gets dark in the wintertime. I have a kind of a different take on this. I never really thought about the time change until, as a young man, I moved out west, and I was in California, and I discovered that Monday Night Football starts at 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely changes your whole culture. Monday Night Football is something that people in college watched before they went out, and I was used to the 9 o'clock kickoff and watching till midnight and then going out. But this was a big surprise to me, and it kind of blew me away because I had a similar experience in the 1980 election. I was living in a house full of East Coasters, and we wanted to watch the election returns the night Reagan and Carter ran against each other, and we didn't even have a TV. We actually borrowed a TV, and I believe we got a keg, expecting a real late night, and we finally get the TV, and we hook it up, 12-inch black and white, and we get it going, and there's Frank Reynolds on ABC saying, we can replay President Carter's concession speech. I think we have the tape of that. It was all over, it was before the polls hadn't even closed. So this is the kind of thing that happens when you're in a different time zone, and the idea of moving Maine into a different time zone than the rest of the country makes me worried about things like, will Monday Night Football start at 10 o'clock? Will I have to wait until 3:45 instead of 2:45 to see Trump announce that he's the new president? So,
Football is not really anything that I thought about when thinking about the change, but what I thought was most important was putting Maine at a different time zone than New York and Washington. I mean, I just think it's a bad thing. I just don't know how, if you're a New England state and you're hoping to be a part of the world and things and politics, that you would purposely set yourself apart from the heart of, New York City and Washington, D.C. I just think it's crazy. I mean, I don't like daylight savings, but at the same time, I'm just not sure this change.
It is daylight savings, right? Wouldn't it be we were daylight savings all year long?
Or I thought, wouldn't we just be Atlantic time?
Yes, we would be Atlantic time.
You would just go into the next time zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
we'd continue to change?
no, I don't think so. Maybe,
So
I don't know.
I think
That's a
like
good
in
Once
New
we
question.
got
Brunswick-
there, we'd stay.
Then we'd be.
Right. I think.
So in that case, if we went into Atlantic time and didn't change, then half the year Eastern time would catch up with us.
Yeah.
Get it?
I think that's.
As much as I'm going to.
Politically, what's interesting, I think, is this idea of regional politics, that that they want the vote to depend on other states around us doing things, because you're seeing more and more movements like that by states who are frustrated with the fact that nothing's happening in Washington. Whether it's the, RGGI, the Regional Energy Initiative, or the get rid of the Electoral College, that whole movement, the labeling, GMOs. There's been a lot of bills that sort of are able to get through because the argument about, well, this will make Maine an outlier is rebutted by no, because we'll only do it if other states vote for it. But that also just makes it so complicated politically.
Well, if I'm living in Northampton, Massachusetts, or west of there, I can see where I'd have a different view of this than
Well, that's
somebody who lives in Eastport.
That's the thing is that, there's two, I printed out a very long article about this, which I haven't actually read, but I scanned enough of it to know that there's two factors at play here. One is north-south, how far away you are from the tropics, and that means how early.
When it gets dark.
Well, yes, thank you. The other is east-west, and we're not only on the eastern end of our time zone.
We're in the north.
They extended the time zone to include us.
Right.
Which is not necessarily a problem for Western Massachusetts, which is pretty much closer to where the line should be. They're probably in the right time. So,
But I remember when my daughter was going to college in outside of Cleveland.
same
And-
time zone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'd be talking to her, and it would be absolute pitch dark outside.
Uh-huh.
And the sun would still be up,
Yeah.
and it would be the same time. So, the whole concept of time zones. What did people do before they were time zones?
They stayed put.
Well, they used it
They
sexually.
got up with the light,
It was
and they
the
went to
railroads.
bed
Right,
with the
exactly.
Wasn't it the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
railroads that started all this in terms of our
I think it's
time
even
zone?
before that. It was in shipping. They needed to come up with a way to fix longitude. This probably is in that article, but and how do you know where you are? It's pretty easy to calculate where you are north south, but how do you calculate where you are east west on that axis? And what they came up with is you get like a really good clock, and you figure out where you are in the world at noon.
And set it accordingly.
Yeah, and then so that's how they and that tells you how many minutes you are in these meridians. But you have to know where you are in the world to know what time it is, where you are when the sun says you are at noon.
When the sun is at its zenith, right?
And then but
Not what's going on in Washington.
it has nothing to do
Right.
with your kids going, waiting for the school bus or
Well, there are two kinds
or
of
the
people. There are
depressing,
people like Cynthia described who live off the rhythms of what's happening in New York or Boston or Washington, and then there are people who couldn't give a hoot about that, who live very much more off the rhythms of their environment.
Toronto.
The light, the dark.
right.
I mean, we live, when you live on a round planet that circles the sun at an angle, there's no avoiding the time zone question. So this is just more of like how do we want to set up our clocks? I mean, we're still always going to be behind others, and the sun is going to be there's no solving that problem. It'll be interesting to me politically how this bill's,
Yeah. It's
turns
gone a
out.
lot further than I thought. I mean, one of my predecessors, George Neval, was a huge proponent of this. And the reason is that he felt we had more in common with Eastern Canada than we did with New York and Washington, and that we really should be orienting ourselves to this part of the country or the continent rather than just be so focused on these national borders. George, remember George?
Halifax. Who
Yeah,
knew?
yeah.
I'm sure this is an
remember
extremely
George
important
well.
issue to many people. I don't mean to disrespect any of it, but I can't get animated
Oh,
about
okay.
it. And I wish we didn't change the clocks.
Right.
I just wish we didn't play. I don't care what zone we're in, but I wish we just.
But
Okay,
I would
Alan,
also-
when Monday Night Football kicks off at 10 o'clock, I'll be over at
I
your
would
house.
also say, all I know is a month from now, I'm going to turn to or 2 months from now, turn to my wife at about 8:30, 8:45 at night and say, can you believe how light it's still?
Yes, I know.
Now that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
think,
get up
you know-
8 months of the year in the dark.
Yeah.
So the idea that the day will be longer, I don't get it. I mean, it's still the same amount of light.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that the day people talk about like more light. It's like there's not
there's
more
not more
anything.
light.
I mean, like this is fake math
You're
here.
conscious for more of it.
Hey, so both of you guys wrote this week about the monument, the National Monument, and Governor LePage's attempt to join the anti-park, anti-monument movement in Washington. What was your take on the hearings this week?
Painful. Well, no, actually, it was, as I wrote, it was a study in contrast. Parts of it, the parts, frankly, when the governor spoke, were hard to watch for a lot of reasons. But I found the parts where Lucas St. Clair represented the interests of the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument to be very compelling. So, in that sense, it was kind of, a study in opposites. But what also struck me was were the members of the committee, particularly from other parts of the country, particularly the representative from Hawaii, who I quoted extensively, kind of shaking her head saying, wait a minute,
I know.
let's stop for a second here. You own this land. Your foundation owned this land. You could control it. You could do whatever you wanted with it. You could keep people off. You could let people on. This had nothing to do with the state. So underlying that was, why are we here?
Yes.
What is the issue here? The federal government did not take anyone's land. Didn't happen. And all of LePage's objections seems to be based on this false premise. And that is that the federal government is taking something away from Maine. And nothing could be further from the truth.
And there's another false premise, which he stated, which is that the old industries of the forest are poised for magnificent growth.
Wax paper.
Oh, unbelievable.
Wax paper.
And embedded in that premise is the idea that we can only do one thing in the forest, and anything else will destroy that one thing.
Right.
So we have to protect the whole of the great northern forest for essentially one use, logging. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, and it's not just him, it's other advocates of that view, and it just seems to me like a little crazy.
Well, and especially since he's the chief executive and apparently has all this business acumen and doesn't appreciate the value of the tourism industry. I mean, it's the leading industry in the state, and he sort of poo-poos it as, it's just this coastal thing for elites, this tourism. It's like, excuse me. And then him saying that, the local people are opposed to it. I mean, the towns of Millinocket and East Millinocket have like less than 10,000 people, and about 500 people showed up for these votes on the park. I'm sorry, that, is not enough to suggest that there isn't support for this monument when the Chamber of Commerce in that area, just people have come out in droves for years sure, there's people who are opposed, but it's not like this was some big surprise and, thrust on this poor town that nobody wants this park. I know so many people in the Millinocket area, business owners, artists, outdoor people, who have seen dramatic change just since the National Monument. Real change.
It's it struck me that his policy is similar to his policy on wind power and solar power, which is people I don't like it, so I don't like it.
Exactly. This is about his dislike of environmentalists.
Or it's new,
Yeah.
and therefore I don't understand it.
Right.
So
But
I want to go to what is old, and I do understand.
and, or not go, because apparently he's never been there. And
Right.
as Bill pointed out in the column, in one breath he's saying it's worthless, cut over land in the mosquito area, and another he says it's next to Baxter State Park, which is one of the crown jewels of
I know.
And it's like,
You can't have it both ways.
which one is it? Yeah.
I think the other thing, in addition to the people associated with this, that really set him off is that it has Obama written
Right,
on it.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
and that alone is enough to put him into orbit. So if this had I wonder what would have happened if this land had been donated by, some well-heeled Republican family foundation, and it had been, George W. Bush or maybe Donald Trump even, who had accepted it and turned it into a monument. LePage would be up there cutting the ribbon. So, I mean, so much of this is personality driven, which is why, from a policy standpoint, it's so hard to stomach to see him go down to Capitol Hill of all places and try to basically play out his personal issues in front of a national audience like that. It's very discouraging.
The personalities, the LePage role in this at the top, most visible, sort of obscures the larger change happening on the ground up there. I think this is a real tipping point for northern Maine and for rural Maine. This shift, finally, more and more
Absolutely.
people letting go of, we're going to wait until the mills come. I mean, in Millinock, it's been, ground zero of that sentiment. Now you find increasing numbers in that area and around the state saying, okay, let's try some other stuff. Let's do some other things. Maybe more tourism, maybe more small business, whatever it is. And I think in the larger historic sense, we're shifting. And LePage is still up there, singing from the choir book of 20 years ago.
But as Lucas St. Clair himself, I thought very wisely pointed out, as he put it, this is not a zero-sum game between tourism and the forest products industry. These two things can coexist quite nicely. And on the one hand, 87,500 acres sounds like a lot, but in the bigger scheme of things, when you look at the Maine forest, it's literally a drop in the bucket.
Yes.
So, to suggest that because we have this monument that is so small it didn't even make Trump's review list, standing in the way of any and all future use of Maine's forest products is just ludicrous.
You know what this reminded me of in an odd way was the removal of the Edwards Dam, which was at the site of the Edwards Mill. And I worked on that project, and there was tremendous early resistance. And it wasn't so much fear of what would happen when you took the dam out and the unknown. It was that symbolically it meant the mill wasn't coming back.
It's over.
Yes.
And this project in the Millinock area has become that. Right. And so now when you have attitude shifting, it's a hard thing.
It is. It's an emotional. It's an emotional letting go.
And Lucas has been more attuned to that than anyone. I mean, he's been the perfect spokesperson for this project because he's sensitive to all that.
Yeah.
But the change has come. It's coming.
Well, and when you consider that not only was it a gift of private land that otherwise could be, barricaded off.
All no trespassing.
Right. And on top of that, $40 million in an endowment for the upkeep. I mean, that is just a substantial investment in a community that desperately needs it. I mean, that's going to provide jobs for, high school kids in the summer. I mean, you already see when you go up in that area and you see the signs on the side of the road for the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, the whole area feels different because there's this monument. I mean, it really does feel like a different place up there. It looks different, and I mean, they're taking down the mill, but I think that it's injected new energy in the area, and the governor is just making his personal vendetta against Roxanne Quimby try to sound like policy, but there's no policy reason for the state to not embrace the monument at any level.
Right, and I don't think it can really be undone. I mean, I think I've been hearing Republicans complain about the big Arctic wildlife refuge that Carter created, pretty much since the day he created it, and we've had Republican Congresses with Republican presidents, and they've never been able to undo it.
The real thing,
complicating it in this case too, is that you have the exchange of a deed here.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
there's promises.
Right. I mean, you can't just say, "Oh, forget that ever happened." That Cynthia, I'm sure that the law doesn't work that way. You can't just say give it back to the Quimbys or give it to the state or whatever they might be batting around. It's just not that simple.
It was a huge legal transaction that, I'm sure was even longer than that Wikipedia article on the
which
time
I
change.
promised to read before the next
But
week.
the real thing is that I can't help but think that Governor LePage just took the opportunity to testify at the hearing, to have an audition. I mean, he's trying to get a job down in Washington.
Is that what he's trying to do?
He absolutely is. I mean, he's out of a job in Maine. He's a lame duck. He's looking for something to do down in Washington, and every opportunity he gets to be on stage and present himself to, employers.
Yeah.
So, he should take a page from Bruce Poliquin's book here.
Go in the ladies' room?
No, just make him just not be so visible. Every time, because I'm sorry, I have a hard time thinking that on balance, he moves in a positive direction every time he does one of these things. Because there are too many contradictions, there's too little logic behind what he's saying. And his demeanor is just, most of the time, too nasty. To leave anybody with a real positive impression of this guy. So if I were him, I'd lower the visibility.
More free advice for Paul LePage from
sure
his
he's
pen pal,
listening.
Bill
We
Nemitz.
want more Bruce, less LePage.
Be more like Bruce Poliquin, and so people will like you.
Yeah.
So what do you got for Sunday, Bill?
I'm still kicking things around. I've been thinking. Angus King went on the floor of the Senate yesterday and brought up once again this Betsy DeVos, or the Department of Education, denial of the UMaine Presque Isle upward bound application. I can't believe that this thing is still unresolved. I'm not sure. I might look into that. I just can't believe that someone at the Department of Education didn't say, okay, let's fix this.
How about you, Alan?
I'm actually going to write about the third wave of the women's movement, which is what I see when I see the resistance to Trump right now. So I think that there's a lot of credit to Trump, but I think there's an interesting thing happening, and it doesn't call itself a women's movement, but a lot of the leadership is women, and it's a different generational leadership than the sort of feminists of the 60s and 70s. And I know other people have said there's been third wave already, but it's just, as just observing it, it seems to me there's something profound happening that is being covered over by the Trump tweets and the Congress division and all this stuff, but on the ground, there's really important stuff happening, and you've written about this, Cynthia, and so I'm taking a shot at that one.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I am going to write about some upcoming legislation in Augusta around the student debt crisis. That's a little niche of mine. And there's a bill that's passed in Connecticut and Washington and D.C., and it's being considered in Massachusetts. It's a student loan bill of rights, and it essentially is the state's attempt to try to get a handle on and regulate these student loan servicers who right now go unregulated and are causing tremendous harm. So it's a bill that is coming up for a public hearing next week, and I think it's really important. I mean, I do believe that we're sort of on the verge of the next bubble bursting. We saw it in the housing crisis, and we're seeing it, signs of it in the student loan crisis, and Maine has an opportunity to maybe do something about it, to nip it in the bud, and this legislation is kind of interesting to watch it spread.
All right. Well, this was great, and we'll try to get together again next week.
See you next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast. Make sure you never miss a podcast episode by subscribing on iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. For more of our podcasts, visit pressherald.com/podcasts. Follow the link there to this episode to leave a comment. You can also leave a comment on our Facebook page. I'm Chad Gilley. Once again, thank you for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast.